free and be. When you look back at the season from hell that the Fever had, none of us expected them to be in this situation. None of us expected them to be winning a very close Game 3.
What if the WNBA's biggest star wasn't done for the year after all? What if, against all odds, Caitlinclark actually stepped back onto the court, not in some meaningless regular season game, but on the grandest stage of them all, the WNBA Finals? For weeks, fans were told her season was finished, that the groin injury she suffered slammed the door shut on any chance of a comeback. But now, whispers of a hidden rule, a suspicious roster decision, and the Fever's miracle playoff run have all sparked a different conversation. Could Clark's story really have one more shocking twist left? And to understand how we got here, you have to go back to the beginning of Indiana's season, because nobody thought they'd be standing this close to history. At the start of the year, nobody had the Indiana Fever penciled in as a contender. In fact, most analysts didn't even have them making the playoffs. The roster looked raw, battered, and way too dependent on one rookie star to carry them. The preseason chatter painted Indiana as a rebuilding project, not a threat to anyone chasing a championship. But for a short stretch, Caitlinclark made everyone believe otherwise. Her arrival turned Indiana into must-see basketball. Arenas sold out, TV ratings spiked, and the league itself felt a jolt of energy every time she stepped on the floor. Clark wasn't just a rookie. She was the story of the summer. Her fearless shooting and swagger gave the Fever an identity they hadn't had in years. Then, just as quickly as it began, it all fell apart. A groin injury sidelined Clark after only 13 games, derailing what was supposed to be a breakthrough season. For most teams, losing the player who single-handedly transformed your franchise would have been the breaking point. Many assumed the Fever would slide right back into irrelevance. But here's the thing, Indiana didn't quit. They dug in, they adapted. And instead of crumbling without their star, they started to write one of the most surprising stories of the entire season. When Caitlinclark went down, the easy assumption was that Indiana's season was over. But that's when Aliyahboston stepped into the spotlight. The reigning Rookie of the Year didn't just hold the line, she expanded her game. Suddenly, she wasn't just the defensive anchor or the reliable rebounder, she was the emotional heartbeat, carrying the Fever with her size, touch, and leadership in ways few expected so early in her career. Then came Kelseymitchell, who turned into Indiana's offensive engine almost overnight. Her scoring streaks became the lifeline that kept the Fever competitive. When the team needed a bucket, it was Mitchell who delivered, slashing to the rim, pulling up from deep, and forcing defenses to respect Indiana in ways that kept their offense alive. Her performances weren't just good, they were game-changing. Veterans filled in the cracks everywhere else. Odyssey Sims provided steady hands and fearless shot-making when the team needed it most. Natasha Howard brought championship experience, physicality, and defensive toughness. Even Sophie Cunningham, often overlooked, became the spark plug, diving on the floor, hitting timely shots, and doing the dirty work that doesn't show up in box scores but wins playoff games. Piece by piece, the Fever forged an identity, resilience. Every time they were counted out, they clawed back. Every time a game looked lost, someone stepped up. What should have been a broken season transformed into a proving ground. And with each unexpected win, the question grew louder. If this team can do all of this without Caitlinclark, what could they do with her back in the lineup? Caitlinclark's absence all comes back to one moment, a groin injury that cut her rookie season short. At the time, the Fever announced she'd miss the rest of the regular season, and most people assumed that meant the playoffs, too. Groin injuries are notoriously unpredictable. They can heal in a couple of weeks or linger for months, and for a player whose game depends on quick cuts, explosive movement, and long-range shooting, the risk of rushing back was too high. The timing of the setback couldn't have been worse. Clark had only logged around 13 games before the injury, leaving fans with just a glimpse of what she was capable of at the professional level. She entered the league with sky-high expectations, drawing sellout crowds, breaking television records, and turning Indiana into the WNBA's most talked-about franchise. Then, just as the Fever were starting to find their rhythm with her in the lineup, the season seemed to collapse overnight. But here's where things get interesting: the timeline. Groin injuries typically require anywhere from 2 to 6 weeks of recovery, depending on the severity. By the time the Fever clawed their way into the playoffs, Clark had already been sidelined long enough to fall well past that initial window. That gap raised questions. If her recovery went smoothly, was it possible she was further along than the public realized? That speculation only grew louder as Indiana advanced deeper into the postseason. Fans started wondering whether Clark had been rehabbing behind the scenes, preparing quietly for the moment her team might need her most. The idea wasn't just hopeful, it started to look plausible. And that's where the conversation shifted from medicine to something even more surprising: the fine print in the WNBA's rulebook. Normally, once playoff rosters are locked in, that's it. Teams can't add new players, can't sign emergency deals, and can't sneak in reinforcements from the outside. What you submit at the end of the regular season is the group you ride with, no matter how deep the run goes. For most situations, that rule is airtight. But buried in the WNBA's regulations is a clause that suddenly made Caitlin Clark's name resurface in playoff conversations. That clause allows teams to activate players who are already under contract but listed as inactive, whether because of injury, suspension, or even maternity leave. In other words, if a roster spot opens up due to another player going down, teams can technically slide an inactive player back into action. And here's the kicker: Caitlin Clark isn't some free agent waiting by the phone. She's already signed, already tied to the Fever, and technically eligible to move from inactive to active if the right circumstances play out. It's an obscure rule that doesn't usually come up because most players in Clark's situation aren't stars. But this isn't just any rookie. Clark is the biggest name the league has seen in years, the player whose impact goes far beyond the box score. Suddenly, what looked like a closed door started to look more like a crack of light, just wide enough to spark speculation about a finals return. Of course, that doesn't mean it's simple. The league is stingy about granting exceptions, and the Fever would have to navigate both the official rulebook and the unwritten politics of playoff basketball. Still, the fact that the possibility even exists changes everything. It's no longer just about Clark's health. It's about whether Indiana is willing to gamble on a loophole that could reshape the entire postseason. Bringing Caitlin Clark back for the finals wouldn't just be a storyline. It would be a high-stakes gamble with everything on the line. On one hand, the risks are obvious. After weeks away from the court, Clark may not be in game shape. Playoff basketball is unforgiving, with defenses turning up the pressure and every possession carrying weight. The chance of re-injury would hang over every step, and if her body isn't fully ready, the Fever could jeopardize not just their playoff hopes, but Clark's long-term future. There's also the chemistry factor. Indiana has survived and even thrived without her. Boston, Mitchell, Sims, and others have found a rhythm that's carried them further than anyone expected. Dropping Clark back into the lineup could disrupt that balance. Basketball is as much about trust and timing as talent, and altering rotations at the peak of the season is a dangerous experiment. But then comes the other side of the equation. Even at less than 100%, Clark brings something no one else on Indiana's roster can. Her shooting stretches defenses to their breaking point. Her passing vision creates opportunities where none should exist, and her competitive fire can elevate a team's energy in ways stats don't capture. For opponents like the defending champion Aces, just having Clark on the court changes game plans. Suddenly, Indiana goes from an underdog fighting uphill to a team opponents must respect. That's what makes the decision so brutal. It's short-term glory versus long-term security. Do the Fever take the chance that Clark could swing the finals in their favor, or do they protect their franchise cornerstone and think about the seasons to come? For a team this close to making history, it's the kind of gamble that could define everything. When the Indiana Fever submitted their playoff roster, most people didn't think twice, but sharp-eyed fans noticed something strange. Indiana only listed 11 players. Teams are allowed to carry 12. Why would the Fever, already fighting uphill, willingly go into the postseason shorthanded? That decision immediately raised eyebrows and fueled speculation. Some believe it was a calculated risk. By leaving that 12th spot unfilled, Indiana may have been keeping the door cracked open for one player and one player only, Caitlin Clark. If the front office truly believed her season was finished, why not add another depth piece, another body to eat minutes, or provide insurance? Instead, they chose flexibility, and that choice has people wondering if they were quietly planning for this possibility all along. Officially, the team hasn't admitted anything. They've stayed silent, sticking to the same line about Clark being out for the season. But the roster move tells a different story. It suggests at the very least that the Fever wanted options, even if they weren't ready to say it out loud. For fans already buzzing about loopholes and timelines, that open slot became the smoking gun. If Indiana really does shock the league and reach the finals, that decision to carry 11 instead of 12 could go down as one of the boldest strategic calls in recent WNBA history. Was it a gamble? Was it foresight? Or was it just coincidence? Whatever the truth, the move added another layer to the growing belief that maybe, just maybe, Caitlin Clark's season isn't finished after all. Even if the rules and roster moves leave the door open, the biggest question is simple: can Caitlin Clark's body handle the finals? Injuries don't heal just because the calendar says so, and a groin issue is one of the trickiest for a basketball player. It impacts acceleration, lateral movement, even shooting mechanics. Reports suggest Clark hasn't been practicing at full speed with the team, which raises doubts about her conditioning and readiness for playoff intensity. That's the medical reality. But then there's Clark herself. If there's one thing fans know about her, it's that she thrives in pressure-packed moments. From college to her first WNBA games, she's shown a competitive fire that makes it hard to imagine her sitting out while her team battles for a championship. Even if she isn't at 100%, the idea of Clark pushing to suit up isn't far-fetched. Still, the Fever have to weigh the risk carefully. A player out of rhythm can be just as dangerous to her own team as to the opponent. If Clark isn't sharp, if she forces shots or can't defend at the necessary level, she could hurt the Fever's chances instead of helping. The line between a heroic comeback and a costly mistake is razor thin at this stage of the season, and yet the possibility lingers, because if Clark is even close to ready, the temptation to unleash her is massive. She doesn't need to play 35 minutes a night, just a handful of key possessions could tilt the balance of a final series. The question Indiana must answer is whether that sliver of upside is worth the gamble. Now picture the finals with Caitlinclark back on the floor. The matchup shifts instantly. Without her, teams like the Lasvegasaces can pack the paint against Aliyahboston, daring Indiana's guards to win from the outside. With Clark, that defensive scheme collapses. Her limitless range forces defenders to stretch the floor, opening driving lanes for Boston, Mitchell, and Cunningham. One player changes the geometry of the game. Her impact wouldn't stop on offense. Defensively, Clark isn't elite, but her presence allows Indiana to play faster, gamble in passing lanes, and generate transition chances. Even if she's not at peak condition, her court vision and IQ are enough to swing key possessions. She may not dominate the stat sheet, but she makes her teammates better just by being out there. Then there's the intangible effect: momentum. A finals return from Caitlinclark would ignite the fever, electrify the crowd, and rattle opponents. Sometimes the psychological edge is as important as the tactical one. Just seeing her check into the game would create a surge of belief for Indiana and pressure for anyone standing across from her. And beyond the X's and O's, the hype would be massive. Ticket sales would skyrocket. TV ratings would surge. The WNBA would find itself at the center of the sports world's attention. A Clark return wouldn't just alter the outcome of games, it would redefine the scale of the finals themselves. This isn't just Indiana's dilemma, it's the league's. Caitlinclark isn't only a rookie, she's the WNBA's biggest star in years, the player who moves ticket sales, sponsorships, and national headlines. Her return in the finals wouldn't just boost the fever, it would supercharge the league's visibility on a global scale. Every sports outlet would cover it. Every casual fan would tune in. The WNBA has never been closer to a breakout moment, but that puts the league office in a delicate position. On one side, protecting Clark's health and long-term career has to be the priority. A rushed return could risk re-injury, and the WNBA can't afford to lose its brightest star just to squeeze short-term ratings. On the other side, the finals with Clark is a marketing dream, an instant classic that could elevate the league in ways no PR campaign ever could. That's why some believe this decision won't rest solely with the fever. Behind the scenes, the league may weigh in, either quietly approving an activation or advising against it. For the WNBA, it's not just about one player's recovery. It's about balancing business, branding, and the future of women's basketball. And that tension is what makes this situation so fascinating. No matter what happens, the decision will reveal something about the league's priorities. Is the WNBA willing to roll the dice for a blockbuster finals moment, or will it play the long game and protect its star at all costs? So here's where it all comes together. The loophole exists. The roster spot is open. Caitlinclark is under contract, rehabbing, and technically eligible to be activated. On paper, there's a path for her to step into the WNBA Finals and change everything. But in reality, the risks are heavy. She hasn't played full speed in weeks, playoff intensity is brutal, and one wrong step could set her back for months. Indiana has to decide whether chasing history is worth gambling on the health of their franchise cornerstone. Still, just the fact that this conversation is happening tells you everything about Clark's impact. Few rookies in league history have held this much influence, not just on their team, but on the league itself. Whether she plays or not, her presence is the undercurrent of the Fever's playoff run and the shadow hanging over the finals. If she returns, it could be one of the most dramatic comebacks in WNBA history. If she doesn't, it remains one of the league's greatest what-ifs. And that's the question I'll leave with you. If you were the Fever, would you risk it? Would you bring Caitlinclark back at less than 100% for a shot at history? Or would you protect her long-term future and roll with the group that got you here? Drop your take in the comments, because this debate is far from over. And if you want more deep dives like this, don't forget to hit like, subscribe, and turn on notifications, because the next chapter in this story could be even bigger.